Hello, today I'm talking about Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, generally known simply as Caravaggio, and known today for his turbulent life, his deep, dark, passionate paintings, and his intense realism and dramatic lighting, which have influenced generations of artists. Now, there's only some 64 authenticated works by him, and what I've done is I've selected 29 to talk about today. This is Boy Peeling Fruit, his earliest known work, painted soon after he arrived in Rome, which was about the middle of 1592. But let me start at the beginning. He was born in Milan, although his family came from a small town nearby called Caravaggio. And when plague swept through Milan when he was 5 years old, the family fled to Caravaggio, but both his father and grandfather died of the plague. He was brought up in poverty by his mother, who died when he was 13. His father had been a sort of architect decorator to the Duke of Milan, who was also the Marquis de Caravaggio. And when he died, the Marquisate fell to Prince Colonna, and he recognized Caravaggio's talent and negotiated a 4-year apprenticeship with a local artist, Simon Pitazano. Now, through all of his ups and downs throughout his life, Caravaggio received and continued to receive the protection of the powerful Colonna family, and he needed it. He was quick-tempered and violent and had to flee Milan for, we believe, injuring a policeman, although one biographer says he killed a man. When he arrived in Rome, he was described as naked and extremely needy, without fixed address and without provision, short of money. He ended up staying with the miserly Pandolfo Pucci, and Caravaggio amusingly called him Mr. Salad because that's all he served him for dinner, salad. And Caravaggio copied religious paintings for him, although unfortunately none survive. And he also painted a few pieces for personal sale, of which this is one. The Boy Peeling Fruit is the only known example from this period of his life. And legend has it that he used a local street urchin as the model for his painting and has captured the boy's innocence and vulnerability. And we'll see later that that was part of his style, that he often used people from the streets as models. So he left Pucci and entered the workshop of Giuseppe Cesare, who was Pope Clement VIII's favourite artist. But he ended up painting flowers and fruit around Cesare's paintings, a sort of hack work that he hated. This is a self-portrait that he painted during a period of illness at that time, using a mirror. It portrays Caravaggio as Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, looking frail and vulnerable. He was extremely ill. He spent 6 months in the hospital at Santa Maria della Consolazione, and according to an article in an American medical publication, Clinical Infectious Diseases, they think that the jaundiced skin and eyes suggest he could have suffered from malaria at this time, although others say it could have been brucellosis from drinking unpasteurized milk or other dairy products. Whatever it was, it seems he never fully recovered because he complained all of his life of head and stomach pains. Artistically, his use of chiaroscuro, which is a word that refers to this strong contrast between light and dark, adds depth to Bacchus's melancholic expression, and the dark background against the spotlit face becomes a sort of trademark feature of his later paintings. So he was slowly making his way in the competitive Roman art world, and it was very competitive. Artists flocked to Rome to win commissions, and there were some 2,000 artists in Rome at the time, all exaggerating their position in society and their skill as artists. The model he used here, we believe, was his friend and companion, the Sicilian painter Mario Minetti, who was about 16. And the work was in the collection of Giuseppe Cesare, but was seized in 1607, so later, by Cardinal Scipione Borghese. And we think it dates from the period when he was working for Cesare, painting flowers and fruit, but it may be slightly later when we know that Caravaggio and his friend Minetti had left Cesare's workshop to make their own way selling paintings, and they established a relationship with the shop owner and art dealer Constantino. In fact, Caravaggio's paintings are very hard to date and authenticate, as he only ever signed one. He dated none of them, and many were extensively copied. And by the way, horticulturalists have analysed the fruit in detail and found he painted with remarkable precision, again typical of his work, down to the prominent grape leaf you can see with fungal spots and the white insect egg mass identified as that of the oblique banded leaf roller. I should add at this point his sexuality. He never married, he never had any children, he never painted a female nude, and many of his paintings of young boys suggest erotic interest. However, he was reported as intimate with, and in fact madly in love with, a number of female prostitutes and models. So the art critic Graham Dixon summarizes it as follows: the balance of probability suggests that Caravaggio did indeed have sexual relations with men, but he certainly had female lovers. This is the fortune teller, sometimes called good luck. What we see is a foppishly dressed boy having his palm read by a Romani girl. The boy looks pleased as he gazes into her face, and she returns his gaze, but closer inspection reveals what the young man fails to notice. The girl is removing his ring. She is robbing him as she gently strokes his hand. In fact, this is the first work we know of where he painted more than one figure, and it became very popular at the time and was frequently copied. His biographer, well, he had a number, but his biographer, Giovanni Pietro Bellori, tells us he picked up a Romani girl from passers-by in the street to demonstrate that he could paint anyone. He had no need to copy the works of others and replicate the idealized figures in the works of the masters. We don't know whether it's true, but it does seem that he painted from life rather than creating idealized fictions. As I said, it was very popular, so popular that a few years later in 1603, the poet Gaspare Mutola dedicated a madrigal to this painting, and he nicely compares the deceit of the sensuous Romani woman with the illusionistic manner of Caravaggio, implying that the viewer, like the young man, is the victim of duplicity. We're looking basically at pigment on canvas, but we believe we're looking at two people interacting. This is the other work he produced around about this time, the card sharps. And it was an important milestone. In fact, perhaps his first true masterpiece. This work and the one we just saw were both immensely popular, and there's something like 50 copies that have survived to today. And more importantly, it attracted the patronage of Cardinal Francesco Maria del Monte, a very important patron and one of the leading art connoisseurs in Rome. He painted this when he was attempting to develop an independent career after leaving the workshop of Cesare. And he left the workshop in, we believe, January 1594. And as I told you, he was selling through the dealer Constantino, but he also had the assistance of another painter, Prospero Orsi, and he was an established painter and well known for producing mannerist grotesques, that is, masks and monsters and so on. He had a very wide and an extensive network of contacts in the world of collectors and patrons, and he introduced Caravaggio to all of his contacts. So this was an important step in his career where he became known by a lot of people who could buy his work. It is portraying a card game, but it's revealing, as you can see, the darker side of human nature because the cheating going on. You see the chap at the back is looking at the card the naive young man holds, and he's signaling the card he holds, and the person he's playing is pulling a card out of the back of his belt to win the round. Now, Caravaggio was known, I mentioned why he left Milan. He was known for his fiery temper, brawling, and confrontations, and that sort of adds another ironic layer to this scene of deceit. We often hear of fights and the murder he committed, but the point I wanted to make here is that we have to remember it was a time of extreme violence. Homicide rates in Italy were higher than any other part of Europe. Travelling between towns was dangerous. Robbery and murder of travellers were common. Walking through the streets required care, as many were quick to take offence, and street fighting often broke out. In addition, each city-state in Italy at the time was run by powerful competing families. Often there were blood feuds, street fights, hired thugs, assassination attempts, and the concept of honour was paramount, and insults and perceived wrongs could easily lead to killing, a cycle of revenge. Think in modern day times of the mafia. Mercenaries roamed the countryside looking to sell their services to the highest bidder, and they were notorious for their brutality. If you read the history of powerful families, you will read of beheadings, castrations, burying alive, cutting off limbs, raping men, women, and children. It was part of the life at the time. So I said all of that just to put Caravaggio into context. But I think Caravaggio was someone who had, if you like, a more quick to temper than the majority of people. I should also say that on top of all of that, poverty in late 16th century Italy was a significant issue. Large segments of the population were struggling to meet basic needs, basically starving. Many resorted to begging, and some turned to crime to survive. So let's get back to his work, and this one is The Musicians. He entered the household of Cardinal del Monte sometime in 1595, and we think this painting was the first painting done expressly for the cardinal. Musical instruments were expensive, and music was associated with the rich and powerful. Music was regarded as an important attribute for high social status Italian noblemen. What we see here is a complex composition. The four boys are squeezed into a small space. The central figure with the lute has been identified as his friend Mario Minetti, and the individual next to him facing us is possibly a self-portrait of Caravaggio. On the left is Cupid reaching, and you can see he's got wings on his back, and he's got arrows in a quiver over his shoulder, and he's reaching for some grapes. Now, Cupid, of course, is traditionally a symbol of love, so the whole work could be seen as an allegory. It's describing music as feeding the soul in the same way as food, the grapes, feed love, represented by Cupid. Now, after Cardinal de Monte's death, the painting changed hands a number of times, disappeared in the late 17th century, and reappeared in a house sale, strangely, in 1952. And it was from that house sale, it was purchased by a benefactor of the Met, which is how it ended up in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This is the first of, or the first known canvas by Caravaggio of a religious subject, thought to date from about 1595, presumably painted for Del Monte, and it was one of the first paintings done by what he called himself Del Monte's painter, which is the way he described himself for the next few years. And he lived in the Palazzo Madama, a very impressive building, now the seat of the Italian Senate. It's near Piazza Navona. And what we see here is St. Francis of Assisi, which was the cardinal's namesake. At the moment, he receives the signs of the stigmata, the wounds left in Christ's body by the crucifixion. And he's being held up by a saint, an angel. Now, as with a lot of his early output, there's a lot of conjecture, and we don't know who the model was for this. One theory is that it's Mario Minetti again. Another is that it's a disguised self-portrait of Caravaggio. What we see is this boy bitten by a lizard, and I'm showing you two different versions that he painted, one from Florence and one in London. And the boy is recoiling in pain as a lizard, which was hidden amongst the fruit, bites his finger. I think you could just see it in the painting. Caravaggio's realism and emotional intensity shine through the painting. And some people interpret it as a metaphor for the artist's own internal turmoil and vulnerability. I think always a dangerous thing to do, to read an artist's biography into a painting. But in the case of Caravaggio, I think the paintings do exhibit more of his personality and life than the work of other artists like Titian, say. Incidentally, the bare shoulder and the flower behind his ear identify him as a prostitute, and some people see this as a parable of the punishments that attend the lascivious, with the snapping lizard representing the pains of venereal disease. But you can take or leave these interpretations as you wish. This is Bacchus, another painting commissioned by Cardinal de Monte. It's both sensual and mysterious. There's Bacchus holding a goblet, inviting viewers to indulge in earthly pleasures. And the figure is both a Greek god and a boy dressed up as Bacchus. The boy has a suggestive look, but if you look at the basket, you can see there's a bursting pomegranate and rotting apples, which always suggests a vanitas theme, that is the shortness of life. So it reminds us that youth and pleasure are fleeting and everything succumbs to death and decay. Penitent Magdalene, completed around 1594 to 5. And at this time, he may have used a room as a studio in the palace of Fantin Petrinarni. The painting was almost certainly commissioned by Pietro Vitrice, Vitrice was a butler and wardrobe person of Pope Gregory VIII. And we know that Caravaggio used a prostitute as a model for his work. We're not sure which, but historians have speculated that it's Anna Bianchini featured in the painting. Now Bianchini lived a sort of marginal existence. We know she suffered the humiliation of a public whipping on one occasion. She was only 15 when this was painted, and she died when she was about 25. And she is shown as the prostitute Mary Magdalene. At the moment, she repents. Note she's surrounded by her expensive jewellery, which she's now rejecting and searching for a new life. Caravaggio uses light to draw attention to her tearful face. And it's possible, again, if you want to read Caravaggio's life into this, that his own violent life may have created a sense of guilt, and the theme here of redemption may have resonated with his own life. A very different painting, Judith beheading Holofernes. It's the biblical story of how Judith, a widow, beheads the Assyrian general Holofernes, and it's been painted many times. For example, Botticelli, Sandro Botticelli, Giorgione, Tintoretto have all painted the same scene. This is a particularly intense beheading, bringing the horror, the blood and the drama to life. One of the things I think is interesting is Judith's expression, showing her commitment to the necessary deed. She's carrying it out, by the way, to save her tribe from destruction. His biographer, another of his biographers, Giovanni Baglioni, tells us that the work was commissioned by a Genoese banker, Ottavio Costa. Now, at the time, some thought the painting was scandalous, not because of its extreme realism, but because her strong features and determination were considered inappropriate behavior for a woman who is expected to be maidenly and beautiful and domesticated. The painting was rediscovered in 1950 and it's now in the collection of the Gallery Nazionale d'Arte Antica in Rome. And we think it was painted about 1598, or some believe 1602. It's been suggested because there is a light underlying sketch which we don't see if we use infrared light on his earlier work, but it's characteristic of his later works. Now, just to add a bit to that, artists from Florence made meticulous sketches and underdrawings before painting. Artists from Venice, like Titian, painted directly onto the canvas without a great deal of underdrawing. And that's the way that Caravaggio worked, directly from life, directly onto the canvas. Although I should say that recent, more detailed infrared analysis of Giorgione, Titian, and Caravaggio shows some underdrawing. So previously it was thought there was no underdrawing, they just painted directly. But now we've seen evidence of some underdrawing, particularly in Caravaggio's later work. Curiously, there are no sketches by Caravaggio remaining, but it's possible that they were all destroyed. Narcissus. This is one of only two known paintings by Caravaggio on the theme of classical mythology, although that might be because accidents of survival, that others didn't survive. As I said, there's only 64 authenticated works by Caravaggio, and he painted many more. Now, Narcissus, according to the poet Ovid in Metamorphosis, is a handsome youth who falls in love with his own reflection, and unable to tear himself away, he dies of his passion. And even as he crosses the river Styx, he continues to gaze at his reflection. And the story was particularly appealing to artists. The writer and artist Leon Battista Alberti wrote that the inventor of painting was Narcissus. What is painting but the act of embracing by means of art the surface of the pool, which I think is a nice way of looking at it. Saint Catherine of Alexandria was a popular figure for artists. She was seen and represented as beautiful, fearless, a virgin, and intelligent, of noble origins, and dedicated to Christianity after she received a vision. And at the age of 18, she confronted the Roman Emperor Maximus. She debated with his pagan philosophers, converted many of them to Christianity. So she was imprisoned by the emperor, but she then converted his empress and the leader of his armies. And Maximus executed all of her converts, including his wife, the empress, and ordered that Catherine be put to death on a spiked wheel. And reportedly, the wheel shattered the moment Catherine touched it, which is why we always see her in paintings associated with a broken wheel. Maximus then had her beheaded. You'll notice that as well as youths, boys, many of Caravaggio's paintings include strong women in powerful and decisive roles. And that challenged the conventional representation of women at the time, as women were expected then to conform to ideals of beauty, domesticity, and so on. Another important religious painting is Supper at Emmaus. This is depicting the moment when the resurrected but incognito Jesus reveals himself to two of his disciples in the town of Emmaus, only soon to vanish from their sight. Cleopas wears the scallop shell of a pilgrim, you can see on the right. The other apostle has torn clothes. Cleopas gesticulates in this perspectively challenging extension of arms in and out of the frame. The standing groom appears oblivious of what's going on. It's unusual. It's unusual for its life-size figures and the dark blank background. The table has a still life meal with baskets of fruit. The basket is teetering over the edge of the table, and notice, by the way, its shadow creates the image of a fish. You see the the tail of the fish on the right of the basket. And the fish was one of the earliest symbols of Christ. That was because each letter of the Greek word for fish is the first letter of the words in the phrase in Greek, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Saviour. So the fish was, in early Christendom, used as a secret symbol. In 1599, he was commissioned to produce the Calling of St. Matthew, depicting the moment Jesus calls on the tax collector Matthew to follow him. It was completed in 1599, 1600 for the Contarelli Chapel in the Church of San Luigi de Francesi in Rome, where it remains today, and it hangs alongside two other paintings of Matthew by Caravaggio, the Martyrdom of St. Matthew, and which I'll show next, and the Inspiration of St. Matthew. Now, more than a decade earlier, Cardinal Matteo Contarelli had left funds and specific instructions in his will for the decoration of a chapel based on themes related to his namesake, St. Matthew. And it was Cardinal Del Monte, his patron, Caravaggio's patron at this time, who intervened to obtain Caravaggio's first major church commission to decorate the chapel. And what he's done here is included uniquely for that time contemporary figures in a biblical scene. This is trademark Caravaggio, but groundbreaking at the time. The work was delivered in 1600 and it was an immediate sensation. And from this point on, with this painting, he never lacked commissions or patrons. This is the Martyrdom of St. Matthew, the one of the other, in total, 3 works by Caravaggio from the chapel. And here we see St. Matthew martyred by assassins. The chiaroscuro, the light and dark, heightens the drama, captures the saint's martyrdom. It actually caused Caravaggio quite a lot of difficulty in painting it. He'd never painted so large a canvas, nor one with so many figures. And X-rays have revealed he actually tried twice to create the composition before he hit on the composition that we see today. And we can tell from the X-rays that his movement was towards simplification through reducing the number of figures and reducing, ultimately eliminating, all of the architectural elements. It's opposite the previous painting, the Calling of St. Matthew, and beside the altarpiece, which is the Inspiration of St. Matthew. And I'm showing you this as one of the first of the 3 to be installed in the chapel. Now, this painting, together with the Crucifixion of St. Peter, was commissioned by Monsignor, later Cardinal Tiberio Cesare, who was Treasurer General to Pope Clement VIII, and it was commissioned in September 1600. And according to Caravaggio's biographer, the Giovanni Baglioni, both paintings were rejected by Cesare and replaced by a second version, which hangs in the chapel today. And the dates of completion and rejection are determined from the death of Cesare. He died in May 1601. Now, the conversion of St. Paul, or sometimes called the conversion of Saul, is now in the Eau d'Escale Odescalchi Balbi. The Odescalchi Balbi is a collection in Rome, and it's one of the at least two paintings on the same subject by Caravaggio, the Conversion of Paul. Another one is the Conversion of St. Paul on the road of Damascus, which is in the Cesare Chapel of Santa Maria del Popolo. On the altar between the two is the Assumption of the Virgin Mary by Annibale Carracci. And Caravaggio is portraying the moment here when Saul, who became St. Paul, is struck blind by divine light, and the horse is rearing up. Now this and the next work are in chapels either side of the altarpiece I mentioned by Annibale Carracci. Incidentally, a lot has been written about their rivalry, but there isn't any evidence that there was any serious tension over this particular commission. Both artists were successful, both were much sought after in Rome. Now, as I said, the first version of Caravaggio's paintings were rejected, and you'll often hear a story that it was rejected because people didn't want to see the backside of a horse to be the main focus, as you see here. But this is the second version, the one that was accepted. This is the painting that was rejected, and the one we've just seen in the Balbi collection. And the one on the right, we see an angel holding Jesus reaching down towards the blinded Paul. And historians have looked for reasons why the painting on the right was rejected. We don't really know, but the simplest proposal is by Peter Robb in his book M, a book I recommend, is that Cesare had just died in May 1601, and the renowned art collector Giacomo Senecio wanted the paintings, and in the confusion following the death, he bought them from Caravaggio and got Caravaggio to paint two more. Remember, this was the cutthroat world of art collecting. Art collecting was a way to gain prestige, and Senecio wanted to own the paintings by this now famous artist, Caravaggio. He was a person who had a very humble upbringing and became cardinal a few years later in 1604, and the year after that, Bishop of Orvieto. The other painting in the Cesare Chapel is the Crucifixion of St. Peter, painted in 1601. The paintings were commissioned by Monsignor Tiberio Cesare, who I said was Treasurer General to Pope Clement VIII, and he purchased the chapel from the Augustinian friars and commissioned a small chapel, small edifice to be built in Baroque style, which you can see today. Here we see St. Peter crucified upside down as he requested to avoid imitating Christ's death. And Caravaggio's raw emotion and stark realism are evident in this. This is one of his most admired altarpieces, the Entombment of Christ, painted in 1603 and 4 for the second chapel on the right in Santa Maria in Vallicella, a church built for the oratory of Saint Philip Neri. There's a copy of the painting now in the chapel, and the original, if you want to see the original, it's in the Vatican Art Gallery. The this particular painting has been copied by many artists, such as Rubens, Fragonard, Géricault, and Cézanne. The chapel was conceded to Beatrice in June 1577, years before, and the foundation of the chapel was laid down in September 1580. And sometime after his death in March 1600, there was a legacy of 1,000 scudi made available for the maintenance of the chapel, which was built in 1602. So the reason I mention all of that is 1602 is therefore the earliest date for the commission of Caravaggio's painting. And this is the sort of way that Caravaggio's paintings have been dated. Caravaggio's emotional portrayal of Christ's entombment captures the grief of those who loved him, which you see here. I've shown you Supper at Emmaus already, an earlier version. This is his second version, painted in 1606. And notice his the gestures in this painting are far more restrained, making presence more important than performance. If you like, he was proving himself in the earlier painting by exaggerating, drawing attention, showing how clever he was at perspective, if you like. Both versions employ this trompe-l'oeil style, that is a very accurate depiction of the table, the food, and the people in the painting, in order to attract our attention, attract the attention of the observers. It's possible, I mean, if you want to talk about let me talk about his life at this point. He had, in 1606, just fled Rome as an outlaw following the death of Ranuccio Tommasoni, and possibly this painting recognizes the evolution of his art, and that over the 5-year period since he'd painted the previous version, he'd come to recognize the value of understatement. In some ways, I doubt that. This year, he'd killed a young man and fled Rome with a death sentence hanging over him. The young man, as I said, is Ranuccio Tommasoni, and he was a gangster. Remember, I said in modern terms, think mafia, from a wealthy family. And the two had argued many times, and they'd often fought. We don't know the circumstances. We don't know whether it was a brawl or an arranged duel with swords. We believe in Campo dei Fiori. The killing may have been unintentional. There are a lot of rumours about what caused the brawl, the fight, the duel. May have been a gambling debt, some say, a game of tennis, palacorda it was called, a game like modern day tennis, or more like royal tennis. It could have been based on a duel over a woman, Melandroni, who was a well-known Roman prostitute who'd modelled for Caravaggio, and we believe, or we know, that Tommasoni was her pimp. There are some stories that Caravaggio castrated Tommasoni with his sword before deliberately killing him, or some say he died as a result of the castration. And on top of all of that, there may have been a political dimension, as Tommasoni's family was notoriously pro-Spanish, whereas Caravaggio was a client of the French ambassador, and there was a lot of tension in Rome between the Spanish contingent and the French. Now, understandably, Tommasoni's wealthy family was outraged by his death and demanded justice, and Caravaggio's patrons, who were wealthy, included cardinals, but they were unable to protect him, and he was sentenced to beheading for murder, and it was an open bounty, which meant that anybody who recognized him could legally carry out the death sentence, could legally behead him at any time. And you'll see in his paintings from this point on, he often shows severed heads, often with his own face. Following the brawl or duel, we believe Caravaggio sustained serious injuries himself, including a head wound and a broken arm, because he spent time in the Ospedale di Santa Maria del Consolazione in Rome. And it was the same hospital that I mentioned before, the one he was treated in shortly after his arrival in Rome. He continued to paint in the hospital, and the hospital did afford him some protection, but in September he fled Rome, never to return. When he painted this Death of the Virgin, he'd been working in Rome for some 15 years. It was commissioned by Cherubini, who was a papal lawyer, for his chapel in the Carmelite Church of Santa Maria della Scala in Trastevere in Rome. And the painting could not have been finished before 1605 to 6, which is how we can date it. And it caused a stir at the time and was rejected as unfit by the parish. Peter Paul Rubens later praised it as one of Caravaggio's best works, and on his recommendation it was bought by Vincenzo Gonzaga, Duke of Mantua, and later the Gonzaga collection was sold to Charles I of England. That was in 1627, and after Charles was executed, the English Commonwealth put up his collection for sale, and the painting was bought and sold to Louis XIV for the French collection, which is how it ended up owned by the French state and why today it hangs in the Louvre. It was incidentally rejected as unfit because there was most believed that the Virgin Mary ascended rather than just die a natural death. At her death, she immediately ascended to heaven, and there's lots of paintings showing her ascending to heaven, wreathed by clouds and by angels. And in this painting, we see, not only do we see her dead, I mean, she has got a halo, but we see her dead, and we also see her dirty feet sticking out at the bottom of her dress, and this was regarded as unacceptable. This is Madonna with Serpent, sometimes called Madonna and Child with Saint Anne. Now, in 1605, Cardinal Scipione Borghese persuaded his uncle, Pope Paul V, to commission Caravaggio to paint the Virgin for St. Peter's. Now, painting for St. Peter's was the ultimate commission. Every artist dreamt about it. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Now, Caravaggio was known to be controversial. So all of his friends and patrons strongly advised him to be careful for this commission. But what did he do? Immediately and recklessly, he asked his lover, Lena, a female model, to pose. And the result was a complete disaster, effectively. Not in the painting as the modern day person sees it, but the painting as it was seen at the time. And what it shows is the Virgin Mary with the aid of Christ crushing a serpent, and the serpent of course represents evil or original sin. And to the right, Virgin Mary's mother, Saint Anne, stands observing what's going on. The work was actually displayed in a chapel in St. Peter's for 8 days, then removed, and the doors of St. Peter's were permanently closed to him, as it was put. One cardinal wrote, "We find nothing in this picture but vulgarity, sacrilege, impiety, and disgust. It would seem to be the work of a painter who knows his craft, but whose spirit lies in darkness, who has long been far removed from God and adorations of God, and from all good thoughts." Well, there could be many reasons why this, or there are, we can see today, many reasons why it would have been rejected and why the cardinal had that reaction. First of all, there's been speculation over the model used. Lena, as I said, Antonietta was her name. And in fact, she may not have been a prostitute. We don't know. She was certainly a model. She certainly came from a poor family, and she worked as a model to support herself. And we do also know that Caravaggio had a serious relationship with her. In fact, arguably, she was the woman he loved most of all the relationships he had. But there are other reasons. I mean, look at Saint Anne. She's shown as an old, wrinkled, poor woman, rather than as she was normally shown, as a beautiful symbol of grace. The Virgin Mary, notice her outer skirt is hitched up like a washerwoman, and also it was thought revealed too much of her breasts. The Virgin Mary and Saint Anne do have halos, but Christ, who would normally have the biggest halo, has none. It could also be because Christ is shown naked, and it's not a baby, it's an older Christ. And although it could have been that Caravaggio did this intentionally to show that he was free from original sin and the contagion of sin and shame associated with Adam. Seven Works of Mercy, a large painting made for and still housed in the church of Pio Monte della Misericordia in Naples. Originally, it was meant to be 7 separate panels around the church. However, Caravaggio decided to combine all 7 works of mercy in one composition, and it became the church's altarpiece. We can see in the background 2 men carrying a dead man, of whom only the feet are visible. That's the work of mercy, burying the dead. Visit the imprisoned and feed the hungry is another, and on the right, a woman visits an imprisoned person, and probably her father, and gives him milk from her breast. That alludes to a classical story of Roman charity. Third is Shelter the Homeless, and we see a pilgrim, third from the left, identified by the shell that he's wearing, and he's asking an innkeeper at the far left for shelter. Clothe the Naked, St. Martin of Tours, fourth from the left, has torn his robe in half and given it to the naked beggar in the foreground, recalling the legend of the popular saint. Then the sixth, Visit the Sick, and St. Martin greets and comforts the beggar who is a cripple. And finally, Refresh the Thirsty. Samson, second from the left, drinks water from the jawbone of an ass, something that is taken from the Bible. Now, it was 1607, after only a few months in Naples, which is where he stayed and painted a number of works, including this one, he left for Malta and the headquarters of the Knights of Malta, because one of the Colonna families, Fabrizio Sforza Colonna, Constanza's son, was a Knight of Malta and may have helped him. The Grand Master was so pleased to have such a famous artist, he made him a knight. And in Malta, he produced many paintings, and what have been called one of the most important works in Western painting, which we'll see later, the beheading of St. John the Baptist. But despite all of these commissions, in August 1608, he was arrested and imprisoned, probably for fighting and injuring another knight. He managed to escape, possibly with help, but was expelled from the order as a foul and rotten member, to quote what they said. St. John the Baptist was a subject of at least 8 of his paintings. And in this version, he's showing John the Baptist as sensual and enigmatic. The young saint gazes directly at the viewer. There are 2 other representations of John the Baptist that I'm going to show you. The first was commissioned by Mattei, and it has the same sense of being a real-life model. And in both of these, there's almost nothing to signify that this is John the Baptist. There's no cross, there's no leather belt, there's no... there's a scrap of camel's skin, I think, lost. Yes, you can just see it amongst the red cloak on the left. And then there's, in both of these, there's a ram. But John the Baptist's animal is not a ram, it's a lamb. And the ram is often used as a symbol of lust. So it's not clear what these semi-naked young men are doing with a ram. But the John the Baptist on the left was immensely popular. There's 11 known copies were made, including a copy by Caravaggio himself. And in 1604, he was commissioned to paint another version of John the Baptist for the papal banker and art patron Ottavio Costa, who already owned Judith beheading Holofernes and the Mary Magdalene. He's still shown as a youth, but this time he is holding a cross, and it's without the ram. I mentioned beheading. This is David with the head of Goliath, painted in 1610, now in the Gallery of Borghese. There is, in fact, an earlier David and Goliath by Caravaggio in the Prado in Madrid, and another David with the head of Goliath in the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna. This painting was in the collection of Cardinal Scipione Borghese in 1650, and it's been dated as 1605 by some, but others think it's 1609 to 10. And historically, the late date was being accepted, but recent scholars are tending towards the earlier date. The inspiration for this, I think, is probably a work by Giorgione, but Caravaggio, I think, captures the drama more effectively because he has the head dangling from David's hand and dripping out blood, rather than in Giorgione's resting on a ledge. Incidentally, on the sword, well, you could just about see it, there's an abbreviated inscription, HASOS, interpreted as the initials of a Latin phrase which means humility kills pride. And you can see here, if you look at the expression of David, it's interesting. There's a sort of mixture of sadness and compassion, which is unusual. He's being depicted as a pensive rather than a jubilant David, which creates an unusual psychological bond between him and Goliath. And Goliath is shown here, arguably with the face of Caravaggio. This is Denial of St. Peter, 1610. It's when Peter denies knowing Jesus 3 times. Jesus prophesied it, Peter said it would never happen, and he does deny Jesus 3 times. The 3 times are indicated here by the pointing figure of the knight on the left and the 2 pointing figures of the woman. The painting is now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It's thought to be one of the last 2 or one of the last few works by Caravaggio, the other being the Martyrdom of Saint Ursula. And it was probably finished in Naples in the summer of 1610. He returned to Naples. The painting, there's 2 paintings I wanted to end with, 2 of his most famous paintings. This one and what's believed to be his final painting. Now, as I said, when he arrived in Malta, he was a renowned artist, and he painted this while he was on the island of Malta, which is where it can still be seen. Many consider this work to be his masterwork. It's been described as one of the most important works in Western painting. Another historian described it as one of the 10 greatest works of art of all time, and added, "Death and human cruelty are laid bare by this masterpiece, as its scale and shadow daunt and possess the mind." Notice, unlike a lot of his work, here the figures are spread out. There's a lot more space. And this is the only canvas signed by Caravaggio in the blood of the saint right down the bottom in the center of the painting. And in case you're wondering, in case you can't read it, it's F standing for Fra Michelangelo. He's using his first name. It became famous almost immediately, by the way. Visitors came from all over Europe at the time to see it in Malta. And the signature appears to be written in blood, the blood gushing from St. John's neck, but it wasn't seen at the time in the same way that it would be seen today, as the flow of holy blood was seen as a river of salvation. So it would be seen in a positive way. Today it's considered the first great modern tragedy in painting. Now, it was in 1609 that he was attacked, seriously attacked. We don't know by whom, perhaps by friends of the knight he'd injured in Malta. His face was disfigured. In fact, there were rumours at the time that he died. He sent a painting to Cardinal Scipione Borghese, who was nephew of the Pope at the time, in the hope of a pardon. And news he received from Rome encouraged him to believe that he would be pardoned. So in 1610, he took a boat northwards on his way to Rome to receive that pardon, along with 3 paintings for Cardinal Borghese as thanks for arranging it. And this is his final painting, The Martyrdom of Saint Ursula. It dates from his final weeks in Naples. He could incidentally have stayed in Naples, because although he may have been found by assassins, it was independent from Rome, because it was part of the Spanish Empire. But he decided to go back to Rome because he believed he was going to be pardoned. And the sea trip is ill-fated. I'll tell you more about it in a moment, but let me just tell you about this. Saint Ursula was a popular Christian saint. She is remembered for her refusal to marry a pagan Hun. And what Caravaggio has done here is picked out or picked on the exact moment of her martyrdom when her frustrated suitor has just fired an arrow at her at point blank range, and you can see the arrow has just pierced her breast, and she's looking down at it almost astonished, but also at peace. One attendant is looking forward at the person who did it, another, modelled on Caravaggio himself, peering from the back, trying to see what's going on. It was painted for Marcantonio Doria, who was a 25-year-old nobleman from Genoa, who'd become an ardent collector of Caravaggio's work, and he commissioned the painting to mark the entry of his stepdaughter into a religious order as Saint Ursula. We know when it was finished in May 1610 because Doria's agent in Naples, Lanfranco Massa, wrote to his master that the painting was finished. He also added that there'd been a slight accident because Caravaggio tried to hasten the drying of the painting by leaving it out in the sun, but it had softened the varnish, so it was still tacky. And the agent told Doria not to worry, as he'd take it back to Caravaggio to be fixed. He also advised, interestingly, Massa advised his master Doria that he should commission more works from Caravaggio for the artist. Quote, "People are fighting over him, and this is a good chance." So I mention that quote just to show that he was still at despite he was on the run, he was still at the peak of his fame. This painting was received in Genoa by Doria on the 18th of June, who was delighted, placed it with his Raphaels and Leonardos. And what happened next to Caravaggio is very unclear. On the 28th of July, an anonymous newsletter reported him dead, and 3 days later another newsletter said he'd died of fever while travelling from Naples to Rome. Recent research suggests he died of fever on the 18th of July in Porto Ercole in Tuscany. Rumours at the time were that he was killed by either the Tomasoni family, or the Knights of Malta had him killed in revenge. Historically, many historians have suggested he died of syphilis. Some say he had malaria, possibly brucellosis from unpasteurized dairy products. And some have argued that he was attacked and killed by the same enemies that had been chasing him since he fled Malta, if in fact there were such enemies, because we don't really have any evidence that they were. So all of these various interpretations are sort of speculation. Recent analysis of his body, which has been found, and his DNA has been tested, and it's believed that it definitely is his body, and suggests he may have died of lead poisoning. And lead poisoning is known to result in violent behaviour, although I should say that he exhibited violent behaviour right back in Milan when he was young, and before lead would have had a chance to do its poisoning. Later research concluded he died as the result of a wound sustained in a fight in Naples from sepsis, a common cause of death from a wound at the time because there were no antibiotics. And then just to add to all of this, Vatican documents released in 2002 support the theory that it was the wealthy Tomasoni family that had him hunted down and killed. Who knows? What we do know is that he died when he was just 38. He died when he was a famous and popular artist. He was always embroiled in controversy throughout his life, either disputes about his paintings and their impropriety or about his life. He did inspire the next generation of artists who became known as Caravaggisti, as well as much later artists like Rembrandt and Velázquez. Then his reputation faded and continued to fade, but in late 19th century, art historians began to reevaluate his work, and in the 20th